welcome. Here we are. This is our Wednesday nutrition education class, and today we're doing something special. By the way, my name is Melissa. I am HealthWare's registered dietitian and personal trainer. For today's class, we are doing a cooking basics class. Now, we are here in the kitchen, but we're not actually cooking any recipes today. But we're here in the kitchen because I've got tons of show and tell items to illustrate all the things we're talking about today. So please feel free to ask any questions in the little comment section or make any comments at all. I'll be able to see those here live as you type those in, and I'll be able to read those later on if you're watching a recorded version of this. So please feel free. I welcome any and all questions. Today we are talking about the basics of cooking. So I've chosen 5 fundamentals, kind of 5 topics for us to talk through today. They are certainly not the only things that you will need to know about cooking at all, but these 5 areas are important aspects to consider and to think about and to be educated about with cooking. And so we are going to talk, like I said, about 5. The 5 that we're going to talk about are measuring devices, types of cooking or methods of cooking, types of oil and fat, types of flour, and then types of sugar. That's what we'll be talking through today. Each one we are going to go into much more detail, as you can see from all the items I have here. I've got tons of stuff to talk to you about. So first, we're going to start with measuring devices. That's over here in this little section of my counter. So as you may know, most recipes do list their ingredients with measurements. So whether you cook a lot or not, I do actually think it's important for everyone to have a set of measuring cups and measuring spoons in their kitchen. They can be helpful for portion control, for measuring out your portions, even if you're not necessarily cooking all the food using those measurements. I actually have 4 sets of measuring spoons, or of measuring cups actually. So you can see those 4 over here. I have 4 sets of those, most of which have actually all been gifted to me because measuring devices, measuring cups, measuring spoons are a very easy gift to give to a dietitian. I actually have 6 sets of measuring spoons in this container, and again, most of those have been gifted to me. I recommend, as far as both the measuring cups and measuring spoons go, I recommend getting stainless steel or metal measuring spoons and measuring cups. I have a mix. I have 3 sets of plastic ones for the measuring cups and measuring spoons. But the metal, stainless steel tend to be more durable, more long-lasting. As you can see with some of these plastic sets, I have broken the handles off of some of them. So they are not nearly as durable. Plastic tends to get a little bit brittle. I've actually broken the handle off of 2 of these tablespoons, so I don't even have the tablespoon for some of my sets. So metal is the way to go with those. There are different types of measuring spoons. So I have a lot of different types. This is more of the round, this is plastic, and this is metal. These are more of the round format. I also have some, of course, that are cutesy and decorative. These are cat faces. But there are some types of measuring spoons that are different shapes. So you'll notice these are oval, and this one actually is more of a square shape. These are the kind that actually more easily fit into spice and herb jars. So it's nice to have a set of these types that are more oval. So some of the really small ones that you might actually use with spices, like half teaspoon, those kind of things, they are more narrow, and so you can actually fit them into jars for spices. So always good to have a nice set of measuring spoons and measuring cups. I am always surprised to learn that a lot of people don't have these types of measuring devices, and for cooking, they can be essential, especially for baking. Measuring devices are really essential, and like I said, if you want to do portion control, these types of measuring devices are so helpful. If you've ever eaten peanut butter, for example, and you take a spoon of it and you think, this is 1 tablespoon, done. If you actually were to measure it in a tablespoon, we all tend to overeat that food item. 1 tablespoon is actually less than we think, so can be very helpful to have these types of measuring devices. When measuring dry ingredients and some liquid ingredients, these are all completely appropriate. When you're measuring a larger amount of liquid, I do recommend having one of these types of larger, clear measuring cups, if you will. This is meant more for liquid, and this one holds up to 4 cups. So this is what's preferred for liquids if you're doing a lot of liquids, okay? One of these big guys. An additional measuring device that I really recommend people to have is actually a food scale. For cooking, it's not as necessary, I guess I would say. For baking, it can be extremely helpful. And with portion control, if you're into that sort of thing with weight management or perhaps diabetes management, a food scale can be so helpful. This particular one, I've had this for probably 5, 6, 7 years. This is a digital one. I will turn the machine on, hopefully you can see it. This is a digital scale, so it has the weight in a digital number there. There are some kinds that are like the dial with a little needle. I've had one of those before. They work. They can be inaccurate though because they need to be calibrated every so often. So they're just much more complicated to work with. So a digital scale is what I recommend. This is OXO brand. This is from Target. I got it for like $10 or $12 a couple years ago. So they're really not very expensive. You can get them from Amazon, from Target, all kinds of home store type of places. So I really do recommend getting one of these. This one in particular can actually measure in grams and kilograms, and also by pushing this button, it'll instead measure in ounces and pounds, which can be really helpful for things like proteins that you're trying to measure out a certain number of, or certain ounces of chicken or fish, something like that. That can be really helpful for that as well. So that is all of the measuring devices. That was our first topic. Our next topic is now types of cooking, or methods of cooking, if you will. There are so many different types, of course. We can all think of tons of different types of cooking methods. We're just going to touch on some of the basic ones today. I'm not covering every single type of cooking method. I have 6. We're going to touch on 6 different cooking types. The first 3 that we're going to talk about are the ones that I recommend more because they are the fat-free cooking methods. So meaning that you don't need to add extra oil or fat to prepare the foods. So first, baking. We all know what baking is, right? It's when you use the oven, and it really can be baking, roasting, or broiling. Those are kind of all within that baking realm. You can bake pretty much any food to an extent, but a lot of foods, a lot of dishes can be prepared with baking, and it's great because you don't have to add extra oil, extra fat to do the cooking. Baking something like a cake is typically done around 350 degrees Fahrenheit, give or take a few degrees, right? But around 350, kind of in that moderate range. Baking something like vegetables, potatoes, those kind of things are usually called more like roasting. and that's typically done at a slightly higher temperature, around 400 degrees Fahrenheit. And then broiling, this is done at the high temperature, more like 450 to 500 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's for short amounts of time, really to crisp something or brown it or melt it like cheese. That would be broiling, and that's the top. So baking, typically, in ovens is done from the bottom or sometimes all around, but broiling is actually the burners at the top that are heating down directly onto the food. So that's type 1. The next type of the fat-free realm of cooking is boiling. I'm sure we've all boiled something. That's when you cook food in a pot of water. I think we all knew that, right? It's possibly the most basic type of cooking, really. We all probably know how to cook something with boiling, whether it's eggs or pasta. Boiling is done at a higher temperature on the stove, so bubbling, and then a simmer, which is in the same realm, but a simmer is done at the low temperature. So when the food is just kind of gently moving on the surface, and that's often done for a longer amount of time. Low temperature, longer amount of time. Higher temperature, shorter amount of time. Boiling is a typical way you can cook a lot of things. Vegetables, grains, beans, even some proteins. So boiling, always a great option. It doesn't necessarily impart a lot of flavor. You can salt the water. Roasting, baking, broiling, that tends to get a little more flavor because of that browning process, whereas boiling, not so much flavor is imparted into your food. Another method of fat-free cooking within the same realm is steaming. It's also done in a pot, but usually you do with a small amount of water, and you usually use one of these steamer baskets. This one is horribly stained because of the hard water that we have here in Ventura County. But a steamer basket is something that I use all the time. It's one of my, actually steaming is one of my favorite ways to cook vegetables in particular. I like that it is a fat-free method and relatively quick and easy to do. The one thing is that it's kind of a pain to clean these steamer baskets, but I do think that steaming is a great option. When you go out to a restaurant, for example, getting steamed vegetables as a side dish is a great option because they are cooked fat-free. When it's steamed, you can feel relatively confident that no extra fat is added to that dish or those vegetables, meaning it won't have as many calories. Now, in the next 3 cooking methods, when you see these 3 types of cooking methods, these can have fat added to them. So I don't recommend doing them quite as much as the previous 3 methods I just mentioned for that reason. So first of all, grilling. Oh, Molly said something. Let me come closer and read. I steamed my potatoes the other day for the first time and it was great. We love to steam all our veggies. Yes, yes. Great, Molly. I love steaming potatoes. Steamed potatoes are my go-to way to make potatoes because it's pretty quick and really easy, and it is a healthy way to prepare potatoes and other vegetables. Great, Molly. Love that. So, grilling. Please feel free to add any more comments that you wish. Love that. So, grilling. This is one method. It doesn't always use oil or fat, but usually it does involve some of that because it helps the food not stick onto the grilling surface. Grilling can be done on your stovetop actually with a device like this. This is a stovetop grill pan. It's pretty shallow and it has these metal ridges in it so that the food is elevated and it has the steam or the grill lines on it. This is done on the stove. This is kind of a pain to clean as well, I will admit that, because of all the different surfaces on it, but it is kind of fun to grill vegetables or that sort of thing on the grill pan once in a while. Typically, this is not how people grill food though, because we live in Southern California where it is grilling season 365 days of the year. Most people do grill outside on a barbecue. I want to take a moment to talk about barbecuing. I want to caution you against eating a lot of meat that is grilled out on a barbecue or a smoker, the barbecue smoke type thing. Whether it's beef, pork, chicken, whatever it is. And the reason for this is that when meat is cooked, it releases liquid. The liquid drips down onto the coals or whatever heat source you're using, and then it's turned into smoke, and that smoke is imparted back into whatever food you're cooking. Say steak or ribs, for example. That whole process of the meat dripping and then the drippings becoming smoke and going back to the food, that whole process is, it does create substances that are carcinogenic. Carcinogenic means it is something that can cause cancer. So grilled meat, barbecued meat, is a substance that is known to cause cancer. So that's why I caution people from eating a lot of that. Unfortunately, barbecuing, grilling, smoking meat is very, very popular, especially here where our weather is so nice all the time, but it is not very good for our health overall. If you do choose to eat animal proteins, I would recommend preparing those in other ways, perhaps baked, boiled, even sauteed would be better than the grilling where it's dripping down and then going back in as smoke. Alrighty then. That may be news to a lot of people, but it is unfortunately true, and more people should know about it because cancer is a serious issue. Alrighty, off of that soapbox, we have two more types of cooking to talk about. So sauteing, I briefly just mentioned that. Of course, you have probably all sauteed something. This takes place on the stove, in one of these little guys usually, some sort of a saute pan, and typically some kind of oil or butter is used to cook foods when you saute. Usually it is a smaller amount of oil or butter or fat that is used in sauteing. Otherwise it's called frying, which we'll talk about that in just a moment. So do make sure that you're using small amounts of whatever fat you're using when you saute. You can get creative. It does create great flavor when you saute foods. But do make sure you use a small amount. This is where your measuring devices can come in handy. For example, I think I talk about this later, but for example, 1 tablespoon of oil, of olive oil, for example, is 120 calories. So if you're not careful with how much you're putting in your pot or your pan to saute in, you really can add quite a few extra calories. Yes. Frying then is the last method we're talking about, and that of course does use fat, often quite a lot of fat, oil, butter, whatever it is, to cook food. I generally don't recommend frying food on a regular basis or eating fried food on a regular basis. It uses more oil, more fat, which adds often a lot of unnecessary calories to the food. If you are going to fry foods, make sure to use an oil or fat that is used for high heat cooking. So that would be like canola oil, avocado oil, vegetable oil, or peanut oil. Those are some of the higher heat oils, which is actually our next topic, oils and fats. But I saw that Molly said something again. I'm gonna see, maybe for another topic, what pans are best used for cooking? Oh, that's an interesting question. Well, I would have to do a little bit more research on that. Actually, I can touch on it briefly, but so yes, cast iron is one of the types of pans that is a great option. Actually, interestingly enough, so it is cast iron, and actually cooking in a cast iron pan adds iron into your food. So people that are low in iron are actually recommended to cook their foods in a cast iron skillet. I have one down here, but it's kind of buried behind all my other pans. Cast iron is a great option. This particular brand here, these are green pans. This is the type that I actually like to use. I don't know a lot about like Molly was asking, the chemical wise, that sort of thing. Teflon is a very popular coating for certain nonstick pans. And it is recommended that once the non-stick surface of your pan starts, you can see scratches in it, once it starts kind of flaking off, you really don't want to be using it anymore, because that's when stuff can really get more into your food. So that's kind of the extent that I can tell you right now off the top of my head as far as cooking vessels go in for that. Great question. Now, let's move on then into oils and fats. That's our next topic. I've taught an entire class on oils before, so this is kind of a condensed version of that. I'm going to talk about, I think I have, what is this, 8? I have 8 different types of oils that we're going to touch on. So, extra virgin olive oil is the first one. That is this one that I held up before. Extra virgin olive oil is one of the, I guess you would say this is the healthiest oil if we're going to be ranking them in that way. Extra virgin olive oil is heart healthy. It has a high amount of the heart healthy fats, so those monounsaturated fats, and it can add nice flavor into a dish. It's generally not a high heat type of oil, so usually something below 375 degrees. Sauteing is generally fine for olive oil and in some baked dishes as well, but if you're cooking at really, really high heat, you generally don't want to use extra virgin olive oil. It's good for raw preparations too, like dressings. It does have a gentle olive flavor, not really, really strong like other oils, but not totally neutral. The one thing to note about extra virgin olive oil is that you want to make sure it's extra virgin olive oil. There is olive oil, and that's not quite the same thing. The extra virgin olive oil is what has more of the heart healthy benefits to it. The next oil we're going to talk about is another one of the healthy oils that I recommend. This is avocado oil. This one has become much more popular in recent years. I don't remember hearing about avocado oil when I was a kid back in the 90s, but it's definitely a popular thing now. It has a high amount of those heart healthy monounsaturated fats in it as well, and it actually has a more neutral flavor than the olive oil is, so it can be nice for things that you don't want to have flavored by the oil. This one also has a much higher, a smoke point is what it's called, so this one can withstand higher cooking. I think this bottle says up to 500 degrees Fahrenheit actually for this avocado oil. The one downside is that avocado oil, as well as nice olive oil, they're a little bit more on the expensive side, but that's what you get. You know, you have to pay a little bit more sometimes to get the higher quality stuff. So avocado oil and extra virgin olive oil are the two that I recommend to have in your kitchen for pretty much any type of oil needs. The next 6 oils are ones that I recommend choosing less of. Canola oil, which is this big bottle here, pretty standard oil that you see all over the place. Tons of restaurants use canola oil. It's relatively cheap, pretty basic, very neutral. It can be used at a high heat, so a lot of things are fried in canola oil. It is made from a plant, and it is low in those unhealthy saturated fats, but canola oil typically is done with chemical processing, which isn't everybody's cup of tea. So I recommend this one a little bit less than the other 2 I mentioned. The next one I'm going to talk about is peanut and sesame oils. I don't have a show and tell for that one, but these ones are a little bit more unique. They're not used as much, but I know my mom, for example, uses them to do like a stir fry. They have a very unique flavor. more nutty, as you may imagine, and they can be used at higher temperatures, just like the canola oil or the avocado oil are used in. So they're not something you would use every day, but they can add a nice flavor, and they're relatively easy to use because they can do any temperature. Similar to that, walnut and flaxseed oils, these ones are definitely not as common, but they are nice oils to have around. They are full of healthy fats. All of those omega-3 fatty acids in the walnut and the flaxseed oil, those are great for our good cholesterol levels, but they're just not oils that we typically use a lot of, particularly because they really can't or shouldn't be heated. They're meant more for very low temperatures or just a raw preparation, like for dressings, that sort of thing. They have unique flavors, so they're nice to use, but again, not really meant for heat or for cooking. Coconut oil is the next one I'm going to talk about. That's this guy right here. Coconut oil has become very, very popular in recent years, and you know, it's a cure-all for everything. Coconut oil makes you lose weight, cures your diabetes, it makes your hair grow longer, all kinds of things, right? But in reality, it's not the cure-all for everything. Coconut oil has a ton of saturated fat in it. It does come from a plant, so it is a slightly different form of saturated fat or a fat than animal saturated fat. So it's processed slightly different in the body, but still it is saturated fat, and it can raise our bad cholesterol levels. So I recommend using coconut oil sparingly, but it can be nice for certain dishes, certain baked items that want a little bit more of a coconutty flavor to them. It's a great lotion, so if nothing else, it is a great lotion. A little bit oily though, but very, very moisturizing. Two more oils to talk about. Vegetable oil, very similar to canola oil in that it is a chemically processed oil and that it can be used in very high heat cooking. It's also very inexpensive. The term vegetable oil can actually be used for an oil that comes from all kinds of plant sources. Usually it's a mix of canola, corn, soybean, safflower, palm, and sunflower oils. But manufacturers can actually use any percentage of any of those oils in a vegetable oil. There's no specific, it's not like a cucumber is squeezed and oil from a cucumber, which there really isn't any oil in a cucumber. It's not like the vegetable is squeezed and you're getting carrot and cucumber oil. It's not that. It's from other plants, corn, soybean, canola oil, those kinds of things in varying amounts that are in your bottle of vegetable oil. So again, not something that I recommend using a ton of because we don't know the full composition sometimes of the vegetable oil. The final oil I'm talking about is sunflower oil. So this one is high in vitamin E, which is an antioxidant, but it also contains quite a high amount of omega-6 fatty acids. While we do need some omega-6 fatty acids, too much can be inflammatory for our bodies. So using sunflower oil as an exclusive oil is not something that I recommend. Moderation is important with it. I think, I want to say it might have been In-N-Out or Five Guys. It was some kind of popular burger type of chain restaurant that was promoting a while back that they were using sunflower oil. Like, we cook all of our potatoes, all of our french fries in sunflower oil. It's so healthy, it's a great plant. When in reality, that can be contributing to inflammation because of the high omega-6 content. All right. Phew, done a lot of talking so far today. We still have two more topics to go through. We will get through it together. We're talking about flour next. That's what all of these giant containers are here in the front. So there are tons of flours these days. We are going to talk about, I think we're talking about 7 of them, but we'll go through them as briefly as we can. The first one is good old all-purpose flour. That's what's in this container. You can see it is white. All-purpose flour is white flour. It is made from wheat, okay? White flour can be used for pretty much anything. That's why it's so popular, so well known. Like I said, it's made from wheat, so it is a grain food, but it has had pretty much all of the vitamins, minerals, and fiber taken out of it. And then in the manufacturing process, they actually add back in some of those vitamins and minerals. But they strip it down to this nice fluffy white flour that makes lovely cookies, breads, pies, cakes, all that sort of thing. But it's missing some of the nutrition that it originally had. Oftentimes it's called enriched flour, and that's because they enrich it back with all those vitamins and minerals that they took out of it. It's not the end of the world to eat foods that are made with all-purpose flour or white flour, but it is recommended to get at least half of your grain foods as whole grains. So half can be this all-purpose flour, but the other half really trying to get in those whole grain foods. And I see that Molly said something. I wanted to look really quick. In and out, yes. Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. See, I thought it was in and out. Thank you. Molly confirmed. In and out is the one that uses sunflower oil for their potatoes, for their French fries. Yeah. Again, not something that we should be eating a lot of anyways, but it doesn't help that the sunflower oil has a lot of omega-6 and can be inflammatory. All right, so in the flour realm again, white flour, the all-purpose flour we've talked about, and now we're going to talk about whole wheat flour. That's what this is, as well as in this bag. So this is a darker flour. See if you can see this in the camera. This is the all-purpose, and then the one over here is the whole wheat. It is a darker colored flour, of course. This is a whole grain. Whole wheat flour is a whole grain. It is the same as white flour, but it has all the vitamins, minerals, and fibers still in it. They didn't take all of that out. So whole wheat flour is much more coarse in texture and generally doesn't create quite as nice, fluffy, light type of products when you use it for like baking, for example. Many times you can replace some of the all-purpose flour with whole wheat. If you try to replace all of the flour with whole wheat, you probably will get a product that is completely different than you wanted to have. But when you can, using whole wheat flour is a great option, or using things that are made with whole wheat flour, like breadcrumbs, for example. Getting whole wheat breadcrumbs, you probably will not tell a very big difference at all when you're using whole wheat breadcrumbs versus regular white breadcrumbs. In a similar realm, we have white whole wheat flour, and that's what this one is. I don't know if you'll be able to see as much of a difference. This is whole wheat, this is white whole wheat. So white whole wheat flour is actually the same thing, really, nutrition-wise, as whole wheat flour. It's just very confusing to have white as part of the name. But white whole wheat flour has the same nutrition profile as the whole wheat. It's just made from a different type of wheat, which gives a lighter color and a slightly less coarse texture. So if you're trying to do more whole wheat, whole grain type of foods, trying the white whole wheat might be a nicer way to go, because this can be replaced a little bit better in recipes without giving you such a whole wheat flavored, textured food. So I've made all kinds of things with white whole wheat. I use it in breads, cornbreads. I've made cookies with it. A great option. I think this is possibly Bob's Red Mill brand or King Arthur brand. Those are typically the flour brands that I purchase, and those are sold pretty much everywhere. Sprouts, I think Vons, and Target. All those have these options. The next one I want to talk about very, very briefly is bread flour, and that's what this one is. You can see it here. It is white flour. It looks exactly like all-purpose flour. The only difference is that it has a slightly higher protein content to it, a higher gluten content, which is what we need for bread. We want to have a more strong structure, so higher protein content provides that. That's basically the only difference. It is still white flour, as it is obvious to see. All right, almond flour. We're gonna go more into the gluten-free realm. We've talked about the wheat versions, now we're gonna go the other way. So almond flour, I have a teeny tiny amount of almond flour in here. Almond flour, obviously, is made from almonds. It is ground up almonds, and it has become a quite popular gluten-free version in recent years. With most recipes, you cannot replace all of the wheat flour with almond flour. Sometimes you can, but in general, you need to have a mix of a few types of gluten-free flours, not just straight almond flour, okay? Once in a while, it does work. Almond flour has a little bit more calories in it than the wheat flours because it's made from nuts. It's made from almonds, which are high in calories. So it can be a great option for people who can't tolerate wheat or gluten, but do know that it may or may not work the same as wheat flour, and it does have more calories in it. Just as an example, a quarter cup of flour of any of these just wheat flours is about 110, 120 calories, and a quarter cup of this is 170 calories, okay? The next one, we have two more to talk about. Gluten-free flour, that's what this guy is. This is King Arthur brand gluten-free flour. There are many, many types of gluten-free mixes these days, of gluten-free flour blends. If you're sensitive to gluten, then these are great options for you. Rather than doing the wheat-based flours. I recommend using one that is like a cup for cup or one for one type of gluten-free flour, so then you can swap out the wheat flour completely in a recipe. So if a recipe calls for 1 cup of all-purpose flour, you could do 1 cup of your gluten-free all-purpose flour. That's what I recommend with that. I've tried several brands. I don't particularly like the Bob's Red Mill brand. It tastes weird to me. So King Arthur is the one that I usually go with. Bob's Red Mill has one as well. That one's okay. Yeah, so those are some options. The last one I wanted to talk about of flour is coconut flour. I've heard this one talked about a little bit, and I usually hear some really funny stories about coconut flour, so that's why I just wanted to touch on it really quick. The basic thing that you need to know about coconut flour is that it is not like any of these flours at all. It cannot be replaced one for one in any recipe at all. Coconut flour is a completely different animal than any of these flours. Coconut flour will absorb all of the moisture in your item and be a very, very weird texture in the end. So, there are recipes that use coconut flour, but if you are just trying to make something with a gluten-free flour or with coconut flour, it is not going to be the same if you use coconut flour. Okay. Yeah, I've heard a lot of funny stories about coconut flour. Molly said something here. I like the King Arthur. I like King Arthur's, and my new favorite is Cup for Cup. Yes, I have heard of that brand, Cup for Cup. I think Target sells it. It makes cake and brownie mixes. Oh, okay. Yes, and Molly says, yes, coconut flour has stale flour. Yeah, a lot of people have tried coconut flour without realizing that it's like not the same. Not the same at all. Yeah. Just a fun little tidbit. So Bob's Red Mill, that's this brand here. I grew up in Oregon, and the Bob's Red Mill factory, if you will, the Bob's Red Mill where they make all this stuff, is about 5 miles from where I grew up in Oregon. Yeah. All right. Our final category today that we're talking about is sugar. Sugar is not necessarily used a lot in cooking, but it is used some, and it is used in baking, of course, all the time, and it is an important topic to talk about. Pretty much everybody I talk to, we seem to talk about sugar in one way or another. So it is similar to flour in that there are a zillion varieties of sugar out there these days. I'm just gonna talk about 6 of them. I've got them kind of over on this corner. Just gonna talk about 6 of them today briefly. When you hear the term added sugar, the first 4 that we're gonna talk about, those are added sugar, okay? White sugar is our first example. I have it in a Ziploc bag because sugar bags tend to be, they leak, so I didn't want sugar everywhere. So this is a basic sugar. Same thing with this. This is the Trader Joe's version of sugar. You can see that they're called different things. White sugar, granulated sugar, organic cane sugar is what this one's called. So they're all the same thing. They're all white sugar, all right? It's the most common type, as you probably know. You've, I'm sure, heard of this type of sugar. It goes by many names. We do want to minimize the amount of white sugar that we consume each day. It has no nutritive value for us at all. It is delicious, and it does help create delicious foods. It gives structure, flavor, texture to baked items and other cooked items, and it can be enjoyed in moderation, but moderation is the key with this and any type of sugar. So white sugar is really the basic thing that you should use for anything that calls for sugar, but in moderation. Similar to that, we've got brown sugar, and I have this one in a bag as well, partly because brown sugar tends to dry out. So this is the Trader Joe's brand of brown sugar. It's very much the same, similar nutrition profile as our white sugar over here, but the difference is that brown sugar has the addition of molasses. That's what gives it its brown color and a little bit different flavor than the white sugar. So some recipes specifically call for brown sugar because it does taste different and react slightly different in our items because it is a higher moisture content with the molasses. Again, using this in moderation, though it is delicious. I grew up eating plain Rice Krispies cereal, and I would sprinkle on brown sugar. I wouldn't recommend that for children these days. It's amazing I grew up to be a dietitian, eating some of the things that I did. But here we are, and once again, my life has come full circle talking about brown sugar. Now, the next one we're going to talk about is maple syrup. I think everyone knows about maple syrup, knows what maple syrup is. Most people think about maple syrup as healthy. It's from a tree, but the bottom line is that it is still straight sugar, okay? I love maple syrup, I really do. It does need to be eaten in moderation though, just like any of the other types of sugar. 1 tablespoon of maple syrup, that is this much. 1 tablespoon of maple syrup has about 60 calories in it. And about, on this bottle, 12 grams of sugar and just 1 tablespoon, which is quite a lot if you think when you eat pancakes or waffles or French toast, think about how much syrup you might use with those items. Do you drizzle it on? Is it a big puddle on your plate? Think about that and how much maple syrup that actually might be. It can be a lot, right? It can be quite a lot. So when I eat maple syrup, I usually put it in a small container off to the side and I'll dip items into it rather than drizzling it all over everything. Can have a little bit better control of how much we're eating when it's in a container off to the side. Also, just a little tidbit for you, open maple syrup containers should be stored in a refrigerator. When they're closed, they can be stored in a cupboard, but when they are open, they are supposed to be stored in a fridge. The last one of the added sugar category we're talking about is honey, and this one's an open, almost empty little honey bear. Honey, we've probably all used honey as well. Similarly, people think that honey is a healthy food. It is from nature. But it is, again, still straight sugar. Honey does have a very, very long shelf life. I've actually read, even recently, that honey never actually goes bad. I don't know if I would be willing to test that, but honey lasts for a very, very long time. But yes, still, pretty much the same amount of sugar as maple syrup and as white sugar, even though it is made naturally. It has a unique flavor like maple syrup does, which is kind of nice for things. But again, in moderation. Let me come up and read what Molly said. I use maple syrup sparingly. I think that was what it's supposed to say. Sparingly because we only had, I use maple syrup because we only had real maple syrup as a kid. Is honey better? Okay. I think I understand the question. Is honey better than maple syrup? It sounds like is your question. I would say no. I wouldn't say one is really better or worse than the other. They are both made. They're both made naturally in the environment, and they both have pretty much the same sugar content and and calorie content. Yep, just confirming on my, pretty much the same sugar content, pretty much the same calorie content. Actually, the honey has a little bit higher sugar, this brand. So I wouldn't necessarily say one's better than the other. I like maple syrup, but better than honey. What did she say? Sparingly, okay, there you go. Yeah. The next two items within this sugar category I'm gonna talk about, which we're gonna finish up with today, they are not technically added sugars because they don't have calories in them for us. So the first one is non-nutritive sweeteners. They're also often called artificial sweeteners. That's what you may have heard. And that would be things like Splenda, aspartame, and even stevia. Those are all the non-nutritive sweeteners. In general, I don't recommend consuming a lot of these non-nutritive sweeteners. Even stevia, they all can have strange effects on people's GI systems. Not for everybody, but they can. For me, they can. I don't eat any of them. They upset my GI system. And there is still more research that needs to be done on the health effects of some of these non-nutritive sweeteners. So I don't recommend eating a lot of them if you can help it. The next and final category in this sugar is sugar alcohols. Similar to non-nutritive sweeteners, I don't recommend consuming sugar alcohols. And the non-nutritive sweeteners I say use in quite small amounts if you do choose them, very infrequent. Sugar alcohols I just don't recommend. They can definitely cause negative side effects with your gastrointestinal system, namely diarrhea. Maybe some of you have had that experience before with sugar alcohols. We don't really buy packages of sugar alcohol. It's not like you buy a bottle of sugar alcohol. It's usually in products. It's usually an ingredient that's part of products, either that we buy that's packaged or that we use in a cooking preparation, a sauce, dressing, something like that. So products that say sugar-free on the package often have sugar alcohols in them, and that's why they are sugar-free. Sugar alcohols taste sweet, but they are not actually sugar. Or it might be a non-nutritive sweetener like stevia or Splenda. They're not sugar. Our bodies actually can't digest sugar alcohols and the non-nutritive sweeteners. We don't digest them, so we don't absorb any calories from them. But that's why they can give us upset GI systems, is because they're not digesting. So I would be cautious when purchasing items that are sugar-free. I'm thinking of ice creams as an example. There are sugar-free ice creams, but they have a bunch of sugar alcohols or the non-nutritive sweeteners in them. So read the nutrition information, read the ingredient list, read the nutrition label. Usually when a product has a sugar alcohol in it, it'll actually list it in the nutrition facts. It'll have carbohydrates, sugar, and then sugar alcohols. And you can see how many grams of sugar alcohols it actually has in it. I wanted to come see what Molly said. Like simple syrup, people put, no. So simple syrups, not sugar alcohol. That is a good question. So not the same thing at all. A simple syrup is actually usually just a combination of water and white sugar. Sometimes they'll cook it, like boil it to incorporate the sugar, but simple syrup is liquid white sugar. Sugar alcohol is something completely different. So that was a great question. Excellent. Hopefully we clarified that one. Yeah. That is everything that we're going to cover today. That was a ton of information thrown at you. That was a lot of talking. I only had 4 pages of notes, but it seemed like quite a lot that we were talking about today. So hopefully you learned something. Thank you so much for joining me. Hopefully you were able to grab a couple tidbits throughout the class that you can then transfer over into your meal preparation at home. Let me know if you have any other questions. Thanks, Molly, for all the questions you had today. Those are great. I'm sure that other people had similar questions to that too, that might be watching now or later on. So thank you for joining. Let me know if you have any questions or any requests for any future topics. Would love to hear from you. This class will be posted here on Facebook as well as our YouTube channel. Until next time, everyone have a happy Wednesday, and thank you for joining me today. Bye.